interesting. So speaking of legends, are there any vintage ideas that you want to throw out there? Anyone that you think from any sport that's retired is worth looking at? I remember a little over a year ago, the market ballooned up huge for guys even like Troy Aikman and like your Hall of Famers, but not necessarily like your GOAT, your stars, your local stars, but not necessarily like your GOATs. And so roast me in the comments if you think Troy Aikman's like a GOAT. But anyway, I think he's a good example. Troy Aikman, John Elway, Jim Kelly, guys like that. And even in like basketball, I could go on and list a ton of guys. But are there any vintage plays that you're looking at?
I got burned pretty bad by some vintage plays last year because, like, right as I returned into the hobby, I was like, man, I don't know anything about these new – I know about these new prospects, but I don't know anything about how new cards work. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to buy, PSA 8 and 9s of Barry, Barry Bonds, Nolan Ryan, Deion Sanders, those kind of guys. And it burned me pretty bad. Like, I lost quite a bit of my liquidity pool because of it, because I bought at the peak basically. And I was buying stuff that doesn't really necessarily retain value, like commons that were like PSA 8s. And I didn't really, at the time, it was all I could afford because the market was like at its literal peak so far, which I think we will surpass that, by the way, in the next 5 to 10 years, which that isn't a conversation to add Paul into, but the other Paul. Yep. But when I look at those kind of players, I've typically stayed away from that since I got burned so bad. But I think when I'm approaching the thought of that again, there's a couple of names that stick out in my head that I don't know if they're considered vintage at this point, because like it's like, what's your definition of vintage? Is your definition of vintage retired players? Because, okay, great. That could be guys that retired a year ago, like Vince Carter. Is he considered vintage at this point? Like a Vince Carter rookie card, maybe I would consider that vintage, but like, anyway. So for me, my top vintage investment for something that I would enjoy, but also would appreciate. So like, I try to buy, especially if it's not outside of my wheelhouse, like my, prospects. If it's prospects and stuff like that for baseball, I literally buy because I know it's going to go up. There's no emotion attached to it. It's just straight looking at a chart, almost like technical analysis chart work in any sort of natural investing. But when you're for me, when I'm talking about veterans, I'm thinking about like this guy right here, Pudge Rodriguez. I'm a huge Pudge guy, but everybody loves Pudge. But Pudge cards aren't necessarily super valuable. So like, what do you do there? I'm probably not going to buy a ton of encased, slabs of Pudge. But what I am going to buy is Kobe cards. Okay. Kobe is going to continue to have runs. Like, he's every time the anniversary comes up of everything, could see Kobe cards pumping for the rest of forever. It's like every time that the anniversary comes up, it's going to keep happening. Say his other daughters go on and do great things, Kobe's cards will continue to pump. Mamba University is still a thing. They're going to continue to pump. Anytime anybody talks about body armor, like his investment in body armor that was worth like $6 million that turned into 200 and something million, like that's a business thing he did. That's going to pump. Anytime his wife takes any of like that success, like we're seeing her kind of in the news as well, that's going to pump, so it's like Kobe is my number one that I'm going to invest in for legends or for quote unquote vintage. But so I have some other ones, but I don't know how much you want me to go into it.
Yeah, I love the Kobe call. I think that you're absolutely right. He's someone who, unfortunately, because of his early passing in such a tragic way, sort of has become a household name. Like, I think all of our My daughter knows who he is because of that. Like she doesn't know she doesn't know about his basketball career. So there's going to be more and more awareness. I have to imagine there's going to be some sort of They Call Me Magic-esque documentary about Kobe.
Oh, dude, Kobe cards are gonna go.
He's got a
nuts when
story.
that happens.
He's got a story because he had a little off the court incident in Colorado. He bought his wife a big ring, and then there was a press conference. I mean, it wasn't his death aside. It was a dramatic story for Kobe. He's drafted by the Hornets, traded on draft night. So there's just a lot of stuff that people don't know about Kobe, but everybody knows Kobe. And so I think that you could get a documentary on Kobe that, I like it's a thing where people will be like, oh yeah, everyone talks about The Last Dance. I get it. I'm not saying that it's going to be The Last Dance type of thing, but I do think that when like Winning Time, I've talked about it before. It's an amazing show, and They Call Me Magic is an amazing documentary. And I'm emotionally attached to Magic, but people are emotionally attached to Kobe the same way. You've got the Lakers. He never left that franchise. He almost left that franchise several times. So there's a lot of drama in the Kobe story, and his death aside. So I think it would be a cultural phenomenon to get a Kobe series of shows or documentary as well.
And he was a link between generations too. Like another really unique fact is he
totally
played with some of those dudes that were on the tail ends of their careers. He played with Jordan.
Jordan, Barkley,
and then,
all the guys. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then he was on the same team as several GOATs. Like
Obviously
Shaq. Hello, and then he even, I think, was on the same court as Karl Malone. Wasn't Karl Malone on one of his teams?
Yeah, that was the team we beat. My team beat them. We beat Kobe, Shaq, Karl Malone, and Gary Payton. That was the Lakers. 4 of the Lakers starters that year. And so he's
first
played,
off,
you got a lot of big names
lineup of teams.
I know.
They weren't all necessarily in their prime right there, but wow, some names. Holy cow.
Yeah, when you face Gary Payton in the finals and you face Karl Malone in the finals, then he's never won, and neither one of those guys have ever won a championship before. It's not going to be easy, even if they're not in their prime. So, really good call on Kobe. There's a lot to talk about with Kobe. So let us know what you guys think in the comments. That's great stuff. I think my vintage play would be, honestly, grading. I think vintage. Because to me, we've talked about before, why aren't retired players and I'll say retired players, because that's how I shouldn't define vintage as retired players, but that's actually what I actually mean is retired players. So
sure,
there's no real markers with retired players. And so grading is still an opportunity, especially now that PSA is back open at a $50 economy level. Or like if you want to go through Wild Cards box breaks, I think you guys charge $60 a card, something like that. I know you're not really making money on that. You're doing that as a service. So, but that's something, obviously, if you want to get into the ecosystem of Wild Cards, I think that's a low hanging fruit to say, hey, I want to send Kendall and T my card. Can you guys grade it? I'm going to do that with you guys. So we'll talk offline on that. But like, I think grading is a thing. It's going to be a thing again. We talked in the last episode about my PSA submission that I'm waiting on at $12 a card. And I actually think that like it would be super fun to go back through a bunch of guys. Maybe it's Iverson and Garnett. Maybe it's Wilt and Kareem. And you got to be careful, obviously, if it's guys like Wilt, Kareem, and Bill Russell, because you don't know what's been trimmed. You don't know what, if something's raw, you really got to be careful. But I think that you could see some grading plays with retired players coming back in the next couple of years. So I just think that's cool. That's just fun. You might not make any money. It's a risk, but I think that's fun, something to get into, especially when you're like grading cards that you tried to keep in good condition as a kid, or maybe buying a lot. If you can make someone's day and buy like their lot from when they were a kid for like $200 and then have fun going through that lot and sending in maybe the top 5 or 10 cards into PSA or SGC, I think that's a play.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I have a buddy who's just going nuts on doing that, actually. Like he's buying these people's lots that they go into a card shop and the card shop tells them, oh, this is worth, nothing. The guy buys them and then is grading some of them and then flipping them for the entire collection,
Yeah.
I forgot to mention one thing about Kobe. So if I can go back to that for just a second. I actually have one card that I'm kind of honing in on that is my Kobe play that is not a rookie card, actually. It's a 2008, 2009 Topps number 24. So what makes this card unique is Kobe is being guarded by LeBron in the photo. And I think it's going to be a iconic card in the hobby in the future because just like Kobe, LeBron is. I mean, we've never seen anything like him. And so that 2008 Topps 24 card, yeah, this one right here. This is actually my favorite Kobe card because I grew up watching these two guys right here, and they were just like untouchable to me. Like they were just, I mean, growing up, like you couldn't guard either one of them, and now they're guarding each other. And then look, this is lockdown defense. Like this isn't one of them dunking on another one. This is them literally having a battle. And this card is super normal. This is just a regular card in the set, but it's come on to be a really important card for me in my collection. I actually have two of them, just base ones. But like if I was looking at just something to really put money into for the long term, I would get like an out of 199 or something, like a colored version of this card, and I would go deep on that. So that's the play that I would make right now, actually.
Yeah, I like that. There's a out of 288. There's also I wonder with my play, what I'm doing with Urban Magic, is there how many of these did Kobe maybe sign that got authenticated?
Oh yeah, that's good.
And that could be another play where even if you can find like a Beckett witnessed or whatever and pay, I would say pay whatever you need to for that, because again, the play of crossing that over to PSA with a card grade and an auto grade could be a thing. So I like your idea there. And it is a cool card. Like I feel like it's an example of, even if you get the base card, if you can get it, in a higher grade, PSA 9, PSA 10, SGC 10, that's a interesting card to add to the collection. And yeah, I like it.